This year, I realized that we're in a constant and propulsive state of moving forward. The game industry is a behemoth that is producing more and more content, and every year it feels like the release windows get tighter and tighter, with the sheer amount of games a person passionate about games can realistically play becoming smaller and smaller. You have to ask yourself, where does this insane release schedule leave games with less marketing? Where does it leave games even 2 or 3 years old that suddenly feel obsolete and ancient to talk about? And worse, where does it leave games that actually did come out years ago that end up being completely forgotten, save for a few that end up on some best video games of all time list that have become immortalized for this reason or that reason, right? I realized this year that we are actively forgetting games and their music, ultimately what this channel is about, and I decided to make a concerted effort for myself to prioritize indie games. To prioritize games that are older that maybe I didn't get to when they first released. Maybe some games I didn't even know released. And of course, some AAA games sprinkled in that I was really curious about. There's this nefarious habit in YouTube land of jumping on trends in order to get the most eyes on a video. Zeitgeist games, Elden Ring, whatever else, right? And sadly, that is the meta and it does work. And so does making end of the year list videos talking about the best games of 2024. Wait, that's the... So instead of talking only about the best games of 2024, all the releases that came out this year, I plan to talk about the best gaming experiences I had in 2024. Because to me, it's not about consuming as much as possible within a given year's games, but the experience of how the medium influences me within a given year. That's what's important to me. Discovering new things, regardless of when they came out. 2 years ago, I was exposed to the music of 2 Ace Combat games, Ace Combat 5, Unsung War, and Ace Combat 0, The Belkin War. In truth, I was like most people, and was prepared for it, just to be mechanical sounding, high octane garbage. Kind of loud, kind of whatever. But instead what I got was A, contemporary classical with the song The Unsung War, and B, flamenco with the preposterously good 0. And this did something to me. This cracked open a decades-old affinity for combat flight games, going all the way back to European Combat Flight Simulator, which when I bought that was quite literally the only game that worked on our family gateway computer. So flight combat games was something I was attuned to, but I'd sort of forgotten. I'd removed the idea that I was even into flight games, but hearing these tracks really unraveled the child in me that longed for the magic of flying plane games. So I took it upon myself to finally grab a PlayStation 2 and play what is known in the Ace Combat community as the Holy Trinity. Ace Combat 4, 5, and 0. 0 being a prequel to 5, despite coming out after. And these individual games all bring with them their own respective feelings, storylines, story structure, and formats. 4, story told through incredible vignettes with voiceover. An individual and human story, a story of redemption and of forgiveness and of growth through grief and loss, and the individual cost of vengeance. And 5 and 0 feel different. They feel much more grandiose, powerful, feeling like a cog in a military wheel. Sure, always feeling like plain Jesus to an extent, though definitely not like Ace Combat 7, no stick with trigger and we'll make it vibes. But even within that larger war scope and gameplay, we end up again with these personal stories. And I think ultimately that's what makes these games work for me. On top of the fact that for games that came out in the early thousands, they just work still in 2024. I was actually blown away by that. But I'm left with a feeling of my own personal growth within them. I conquered the difficulty. I survived. I triumphed over a tunnel run where you can barely see these cranes that you have to swoop in and over. Like, what kind of an asshole puts cranes in an already difficult scenario just to f with you? These games are my personal Dark Souls. I love them for how they challenge me as a person, not dissimilarly to how people probably feel when they play a FromSoft game, like an Elden Ring or a Dark Souls. Sure, Ace Combat isn't maybe as hard as those games, and I know some people say that FromSoft aren't hard. Well, they are, but whatever. But Ace Combat feels like a journey to become the best version of oneself. Weirdly, you have to risk it all. You have to fly in to get there. Learn how to fly. Learn how to move with the plane, to become one with this vehicle of destruction, to risk it all to get to the other side of the conflict and survive. The payoff being some of the best final moments in any game I've played in recent memory. Megalith Anyu's Day in Ace Combat 4, The Unsung War in Ace Combat 5, and 0 in Ace Combat 0. Incredibly original titles. These moments are forever imprinted in my brain as some of the most glorious moments in my gaming life. 30 years. To the point that I wept when I heard Unsung War while shooting down a fucking satellite with nukes or whatever on it. I cried at an Ace Combat game, a plane game, where you go pew pew and shoot things down and feel like a total badass. Yes, I did. I fucking ugly cried man tears while listening to this rapturous choir that I have heard now countless times. When they say that games can move you, they mean like this. Also, I don't know who says that. That's just something I'm including to fit my narrative. But I mean, it's true. Games can move you. Playing the Holy Trinity was exceptional. I'm so grateful I did it on the OG system too, on the PlayStation 2. Felt really good to have to play the way I would have played in 2001. A powerful gaming experience that will stay with me for a long time. And if you've never played an Ace Combat, I can't recommend 7 or Project Wingman enough. Seriously, go play it. It might change your life. One of the biggest disappointments for me of 2024 was Final Fantasy XIV. I love that game. Got me through the loss of my dad and like actively helped me heal, plus and mostly grief counseling. But Endwalker was happening sort of at the same time as all that for me, so it really helped me connect with my grief in a big way. I was excited for Dawn Trail, a new beginning, a fresh start, all that good stuff. And then, yeah, I'm not going to go crazy into the details, but suffice it to say, I found the overuse of the Dawn Trail motif beyond grating. Like, it was everywhere. And I suppose Flow was everywhere too for reasons, but for whatever reasons, Dawn Trail's motif just did not land with me. It did not land. Also, I realized how little I'm actually playing 14 when story's happening. I mean, after all, story is like the draw to this game, an MMO story single player experience while in an MMO. So yeah, of course we're doing other stuff and we're doing dungeons and all that, but I'm just amazed that 10 years and this overarching process of this particular MMO has just not changed. And I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but in this case it does feel kind of broke to me. This one really surprised me how sharply I jumped ship considering the 500 plus hours I have in this game. I do still feel like 14 is my home game, but it's not all bad because it did lead me to Guild Wars 2, which in a lot of ways is the polar opposite of 14. Horizontal progression, getting to understand what that means was really cool, and it also turns out that that's why I like Elder Scrolls Online, though that's a separate discussion. I've gone through a lot of MMOs this year to try and find something to fill that MMO-sized hole that 14 has left me, though I'm sure I'll definitely go back to it at some point. Guild Wars 2 though is interesting to me because before pivoting hard to it, I had played for about like 10 hours and I was so overloaded with menus and the inventory and trying to understand the systems that I was like, man, this sucks. But as I started to understand how everything kind of works and plays and functions, I realized that here was my game. Here was a game that respected my time, led to a bunch of new discoveries because I could actively explore the map to my heart's content, which is something that you actively do in the game. And it's something I love in all video games, virtual tourism. I love being a tourist in video games, exploring zones, discovering new things to look at. I also love the functionality of the mounts. In fact, I'm a little burnt out on it right now, but I'm gonna go back to it because the majority of my time that I played Guild Wars 2 for about 160 hours this year was not even actually playing the story, but skipping ahead to the 3rd expansion and the Path of Fire expansion and doing all that so I could collect all of the mounts. The mounts in this game offer a new way to play and explore, jump further, swim faster, fly higher, fly faster. They really feel like an extension and an enhancement of your character. Plus, they're genuinely gorgeous. On top of this, finding a class was really fun too, because I essentially tried every class and eventually really solidified on the Ranger class with the Soul Beast specialization that you get to when you level up to level 80. It also changes the way the game plays. I thought that was so cool. Being able to play one class and then have 3 specializations that essentially change how the class is played. A lot of games do this. Path of Fire is a prime example. It's really neat to me. Also, changing weapons changes ability sets. So while elite specs have their abilities in place, say you wanted to rock dual daggers or a longbow and then swap to a 2-handed axe, you can. And that's going to bring with it its own set of abilities and so on and so forth. And listen, I do love and miss whenever I don't play 14, the idea of just switching out your job. That to me makes Final Fantasy XIV really special, and that also I think really does respect a player's time. I wish all MMOs did that. I'm not really crazy about alt characters, leveling up alts and all that, but that aside, Guild Wars 2 is really just fun. The combat is fun, the exploration is fun, the world bosses where there's like 50 to 100 people on screen all doing the same thing is fun. Getting exotic gear and not needing to grind out some gear levels just to like keep playing the game is fun. Yeah, sure, it's not that carrot that some people crave, and I do crave that carrot in some games, but in this particular instance I don't. I love Guild Wars 2. I'm definitely gonna be calling it that home game now. No one who was paying attention would deny that Wuthering Waves had a less than stellar launch. In fact, I think those of us who played it recognized pretty quickly that the launch was less than great. Personally, I didn't run really into too many problems aside from the story of 1.1 being abysmally boring, and at least until Act 5 into Act 6, I was kind of questioning what the hell was going on, but it really turned around. And regardless of that, Wuthering Waves has definitely been one of my favorite games to play for the better part of 2024, and it's a game I love coming back to. It's got terrific combat, got interesting characters, and the general world design put it at the top of the pack for me when it comes to the gacha games I play and enjoy. Yeah, I know it's a dead game, it's not making any money, but it just scratches that itch for me. Also, that's a joke. What's more impressive, even more so, is how quickly Kuro Games was able to turn the ship and correct course to the point that incremental updates are exciting ones. Mount Firmament was a joy to explore and provided Jinshi and Changli, two of the best characters in the game and really two of my favorite characters right now, both from a combat perspective and story perspective. The Black Shores definitely was another highlight between Shorekeeper and Camellia, especially from story perspectives and character interactions and character perspectives. Gacha games are really complicated, but this is a game that I joyfully support financially, and I'm always excited when a new character comes around. Do I love gacha? Not anymore. For a little while there, I was kind of into gacha in a big way. I do play 3 on and off. This particular game has really struck a nerve for me. It's definitely interesting to read and explore the discourse around it. I've been seeing a lot of discussion about gacha games in their own way, that daily live service game being a natural evolution of the MMO, while certainly being probably more lucrative. I have learned this year that FOMO is insidious, and I have to really take a look at how I spend my money and use my money. I do appreciate that in Wuthering Waves, that the only true gacha is for characters, with the weapons being guaranteed after 60 pulls, if I remember. I really detest 50-50, and I think it's a terrible system. And being able to lose the chance of a character and having to spend more or play more because you want a character, yeah, that sucks. I'm really not crazy about gacha as a system. In fact, I've really become aware of more of my habits with it. Regardless of that, Wuthering Waves is a game I don't mind spending on. I like Kuro Games, I like the company, I like the game, and I'm really excited for what the future holds. I believe that they've learned from their past blunders, and I'm eager to see what the 2.0 patches have in store for us. I'm also hopeful for a big shift in musical tone, as music was definitely a corner that was lacking when it came to this game experience, though even that has improved remarkably. Speaking of music though, I have realized this year that it's impossible for me to really sit down and pick a true soundtrack of the year. I mean, I'm gonna try to do it anyway, but it's probably even harder than talking about a game of the year for me, because soundtracks are so much more of a personal journey. I actually think we connect more to soundtracks than gameplay experiences, partly because the soundtrack is the emotional impetus, the emotional glue, it's the joints of the gaming experience. It connects the gameplay to us. Like sure, we connect to the game and the gameplay and the environments and worlds, but it's the music that is this undercurrent across all games that feeds us the emotions and soul of an experience. So it's a pretty emotionally charged category. And on top of that, I also just like music so much that it's hard for me to add or subtract or assess or criticize or critique why I like something more than other things. All game music, to me, is inherently good. Not only that, but I really don't believe that any composer is actively writing music badly unless it's an intentional choice. So at the end of the day, video game music ranking is sort of arbitrary and very much like splitting hairs, because how the hell do you even do it? But that aside, I'd have to say that my favorite soundtrack of the year that I played in 2024, of all the games I played in 2024, was Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade somehow managed to take EDM, opera, classical rock, jazz, and still retain a cohesive whole when it comes to its soundtrack. Somehow, hearing a flurried and beautiful jazz melody of a soprano while wandering the wildlands or the wastes made sense. I love the inherent femininity within each of these pieces, the solo singer often representing Eve, whereas Eve herself as a character could be frequently rather cold and almost hard to pin down or really connect with those potential depths that Eve had. But what we hear of Eve is actually in the music. Not only that, but each boss provided a new sound print and a new sound font to carry us through those conflicts with frenetic beats per minute. And honestly, I just loved it all. I loved all of the soundtrack I've heard this year. Out of all the soundtracks, this was the one I connected to the most. And like I said before, it doesn't mean that those other soundtracks are not good. It's just that my personal tastes and where I'm at as a 37-year-old in 2024, I guess lent itself towards the sound of Stellar Blade. I approached soundtrack rankings in a couple different ways. One is I based it off of the complete soundtrack. How does a soundtrack sound? How many pieces do I like? How many pieces do I want to skip over? How does the music fit the situation of the game? And to me, Stellar Blade's soundtrack was perfect every track. And they're all tracks that I could sit down and listen to, and more importantly, I think it's just a vibe. And it sets the tone unbelievably well. Some other soundtracks that I really liked this year were Metaphors. I think Metaphors soundtrack really pushes vocal performance and vocal tracks forward in a big way. I do think that a lot of the instrumental tracks I'm sort of neutral on. Katana Zero was a sick soundtrack experience. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, this one especially just struck a chord with me because of how choral and orchestral it is, and the fact that it's composed by Uematsu, and the game in particular also threw me back to a time period of being younger. The action RPG elements were really terrific in this game. No one really talks about Relink anymore, and musically it was just such a pleasure to listen to, and it's definitely one of my soundtracks of the year. Black Myth Wukong soundtrack for the way that it showcased and taught and expressed Chinese mythology within it. Astrobots, of course, for its playful, dynamic, joyful homage to past PlayStation heroes, and also the way that it celebrated the bounding joy and energy of this lovely little robot. Soundtracks I was exposed to more this year on my journey to play other games that weren't just, games that came out this year were Monster Hunter Rise, Hunt Showdown, of course, Sonic. We can't forget to talk about how wonderful Sonic music is. That's completely blown me away, and I'm so excited to dig into more of that into 2025. There's also so many pieces of music that I've listened to this year that I've had some emotional connection to, and that's partly why this job is so awesome, because I do get to listen to so much amazing video game music from things that I would have never guessed. There were two games this year that I had incredible moving experiences with. One of them I started playing into last year and finished this year, at least caught up with the story, and the other I played a few months ago. Warframe completely caught me off guard and has become one of my favorite games that I play, that I come back home to. It's just a game that feels so huge and grand despite how many personal little micro stories we get, in a way that's not dissimilar to the way that Ace Combat functions, obviously in a live service model and not in a plain game model. The Jade Shadows update was profoundly beautiful, albeit extremely short. January was the new war finishing for me and catching up to the current state of the game, catching up to the current story. And it's a story I never expected to even get to because of how hard it can be to trudge through the new player experience, to get to that other side, to get to Neptune, to finally experience the second dream, kind of launch that story process, to finally experience the sacrifice, Chains of Harrow, and so on and so forth. But when we talk about games where we get a sense of power fantasy, there's no game like Warframe, so to couple that with incredible emotional highs and incredible Herculean story highs and deeply intimate and personal story lows, to go from macro to micro within this large galactic scope is, I think, really crazy to put into perspective, all within Warframe. Not only all of that, but this game also has some of the best login music I've ever heard in a game. When you think about login music, it's only, how often are you spending time at a login screen? Maybe 30 seconds. Every time you log into a new update for Warframe, you're getting this incredible setup musically. And I think what sets Warframe apart for me when comparing it to other games is the fact that if I'm ever bored, I just change my frame. If I'm bored here, I'll go do this. There's seemingly endless possibilities, endless opportunities to do something. It always just tickles some part of you. Maybe that's kind of the MMO part of my life right now that's also slipping in there, but also, personal customization is up there for one of the reasons it's so awesome. You can make your Warframe look like whatever the hell you want to, and it'll literally never look like somebody else's. Your personal expression with color and accessories and fashion frame is there in spades. I also think this game is amazing because it just continues to reinvent itself in one way or another. And I suppose depending on how you look at that, it can be a positive or a negative because there are so many things that you can do. And even the devs are like, this game has morphed in a way that we're just kind of winging it. The devs are kind of like, should we add this? And they do. And yeah, that may muddle the experience for some, but for me, it gives me an opportunity to explore my own tastes and interests. But what really caught me off guard about this game, like I mentioned before, is the story. It is a profoundly human and deeply sympathetic experience to connect with the human condition, what it means to love, what it means to fear, what it means to have anger, what it means to be lost in the world, what it means to find oneself. These are not topics I ever expected to find when finally deciding to push through and actually play Warframe, but those are the very core details that I discovered that made me fall in love with this game. I connected with a game that seemingly on the surface is rather shallow, but when looking a little bit closer, you actually see the depth, and it is absolutely an iceberg. Try it. Just get to Neptune. The other most moving experience I had this year was Silent Hill 2. I never played the original because, well, I'm afraid and was afraid, but pushing through the horror aspects of this game left me really hollowed out. For about a month after finishing this game, I almost don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want to spoil the experience. The emotional lows that one experiences in life exist in this game. Choice, loss, frustration, anger, helplessness. Those are key tenets of what makes Silent Hill 2 so good. I wouldn't say it's a generally optimistic game, but oddly, there is this character by the name of Laura that somehow, despite being a giant pain in the ass during this game, encapsulates hope, encapsulates optimism, encapsulates possibility. So here you have this broken, bleak, disturbingly disgusting world, and through it all, you still manage to see goodness, to see the future, to see opportunity. That opportunity can be bigger than mistakes. The opportunity to have hope. It's a really bleak gaming experience that one has to really be careful to play when they're in, and you have to be in the right mental state for it because it can genuinely really affect you. Like, this is the power of video games in full effect. The game is so well done, and considering the fact that it's a remake, it's actually shocking to think that this game has already existed in the gaming lexicon way before 2024. This game had a profound effect on me, and it made me reflect on loss and grief, and what it means to be a witness to death, what it means to navigate death, what it means to be human, to suffer, to feel like you have nowhere to turn, and feel hopelessly lost in the dilapidated and confusing corners of your own mind. Now, all of that obviously makes sense because that's what psychological horror is. It challenges us psychologically. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and in the end, it was probably the most moving experience I've had gaming this entire year. And honestly, probably even beyond that, the last 2 or 3. Every year I try to play one game that is especially difficult for me, and I wouldn't say I'm an especially patient person. In fact, I would say I'm a pretty impatient person, and I want things done, and I want to do them, and I don't want to suffer. And Black Myth Wukong really caused me to pause and really temper myself. It was the challenging game that I played this year. I also played Dark Souls, but I think Black Myth Wukong went beyond the Dark Souls series for me. It goes beyond the difficulty and the challenging aspects because this game was a delight to play. It highlighted story, it highlighted Chinese culture, Chinese landscapes, and Chinese mythology. If you're a fan of virtual tourism and experiencing new things you may never see ever in your lifetime, well, in this case, you would never see these monsters, and I hope not for your own sake. Black Myth Wukong delivered on that, and in spades. I'll never forget fighting this dragon lady on a giant tortoise. I'll never forget fighting the celestial court. I'll never forget how small I felt and how big I felt all at the same time, fighting some of these incredible bosses, fighting wolfmen, tiger men, spider ladies, dragon men, listening to a headless musician serenade me with no head, no mouth. The joy of completing this game and triumphing, climbing a mountain of difficulty and emerging out the other side, a slightly different version of myself, was what really caught me off guard about this gaming experience. The thing that's really delightful is that here you are, this all-powerful Black Myth Wukong, and yet you're still not the biggest fish in the pond. I love that. This game was a visual feast from start to finish, and I was always excited to turn the corner and see what awaited me. I don't think it was the most innovative game when it came to actual gameplay or combat. We've seen this type of combat plenty of other games. But what it does do well, and what it does do right, is elevating that gameplay experience visually, also connecting us to a novel that so many of us in the West have literally never been exposed to. I certainly hadn't ever been exposed to it before. Connecting us to a story that is so important to another culture, essentially giving us access to something that many of us just haven't ever seen or wouldn't even consider. Yeah, but I can't get over the feeling of triumphing over this game. I can't get over the feeling of the deification in this game, of feeling like a god. I can't get over the feeling of excitement for every boss fight, the questions of what a boss is going to look like, what their abilities are going to be, how they're going to challenge me, but really just not knowing what was around the corner. And I think for me, that's something I got to spend some time with this year. I love variability in my games. I love not knowing what to expect. I love seeing something new at every corner. What new enemy does this game have in store for me? And yeah, I got plenty frustrated, and at times I took a little bit of a break because I didn't like how challenging it was for me at times, but coming out that other side with a sense of accomplishment is very hard to do in video games for me personally. And not only that, but coming out the other side with a smile, especially when I was getting my ass handed to me time and time again by some of the later bosses. I loved it. It was one of the best gaming experiences of the year for me, for sure. So in reality, what is my game of the year? Well, it's Infinity Nikki. I mean, no. I don't have one. For a second there, I said it was Indiana Jones because Indiana Jones strikes everything I love in gaming, especially as an almost 40-year-old. Like, it was a nostalgia trip. It was a terrific score, borrowing from that John Williams sound, letting that music of that classic Hollywood guide us without overstaying its welcome. There was virtual tourism in that, exploring fantastic landscapes, visiting places I'll probably never go to, terrific combat, feeling like an absolute badass punching fascists in the face, quips, whips, and jokes. I can't even believe that Troy Baker is actually Indiana Jones. I mean, that's insanity. Like, that's so inspirational, like the talent on display there. But more than anything in 2024, I realized what I'm not anymore. I realized that I'm not as crazy about JRPGs as I used to be. I've realized that I've kind of turned away from turn-based gaming that I used to do exclusively as a child and a young adult. I've realized that my own personal tastes have really changed, but I will still always give myself the opportunity to try to like something because I love video games, and I love gaming, and I love music and games. And I want to appreciate the gaming experience that I have throughout the year, not just because I want to rush to get all the games done in a year, but because I want to immerse myself in this passion that I get to share with people and talk with you about. This year was also about being strong in my own personal opinions and letting those opinions be known, regardless of backlash, sharing why I like or dislike something, regardless of what came from it, finding out those reasons to like or dislike something, which a lot of people don't do. And trust you me, people will let you know when they don't like what your perspective is. But even at 37, I'm realizing that I'm just learning every single day. No day is the same in this career, in this job, being a YouTuber, being a person who gets to play video games for a living. So it's impossible for me to have a game of the year. I mean, how about you though? What were some of your favorite gaming experiences in 2024? Was it a game from 2024 that moved you, or was it a game from 10 years ago? What were you up to in 2024? Let me know. Thanks a ton, and I'll see you later.